everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Supporting Children's Wellbeing when Working with Separating Parents. My name's Chris Dolman, and I work for Emerging Minds, National Workforce Centre for Child Mental Health, and we're delighted to be co-presenting this webinar in partnership with CFCA. I'm really looking forward to our discussion this afternoon and the different fields of expertise that each of our panelists will be bringing to this topic. So, yeah, thanks very much for setting aside the time. So the focus of this webinar is really around exploring how child-centered approaches can support parents to have conversations with their children and understand their needs and strengthen their relationship with their children during periods of separation, and also, prioritise children's safety and social and emotional well-being. So certainly with the launch of the National Children's Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy yesterday, and the prevalence of separation in families in this country, it's such a pertinent and important issue for us to be exploring. As we begin, I guess I want to sort of map out for you what we will be covering this next hour. We will be exploring the importance of understanding the impacts of separation on children when working with parents, how to work with separating parents in child-centered ways to promote the parent-child relationship and children's well-being, and how to respond to work with distressed parents and navigate through those disagreements. Certainly Emerging Minds and CFCA would like to recognise and pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners of these lands, the lands where we work and play and walk on throughout this country. We acknowledge and respect their traditional connections to their land, waters, culture, spirituality, family and community for the well-being of all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander children and their families. So this webinar is part of a broader series offered by CFCA and Emerging Minds around infant and child mental health. We've got a couple of webinars upcoming in the coming months. One is understanding and supporting infant mental health, and also in the new year, using Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander concepts of mental health to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and their families in mainstream services. This year already, we've looked at how to recognise and respond to complex trauma in infants and children, and themes around families and homelessness, and also what is the social model of disability and why this is important for child mental health. All of those are available on the Emerging Minds and CFCA websites if you'd like to view those. Okay, well, it's now my pleasure to introduce you to our panellists this afternoon, Emily Stevens, Roxanne Nathan and Felicity Kime. And you've all had an opportunity to read their bios that have been distributed with material, so I won't sort of go through those now. Instead, I'd like to ask each of you, I guess, what it is that has drawn you to this area of work and or sustained you in this area of work. So Emily, hi, welcome. Could we begin with you? What is it that's kind of drawn you to sort of working in this area of families and separation? And
Great, thanks, Chris. So I've been working as a researcher for the past 7 or 8 years in the field of family sociology as a qualitative researcher, particularly in the parenting space, focusing on fathers' experiences of taking parental leave and some of the factors that can facilitate that. But over the past few years, my focus has shifted to post-separation parenting, mediation and family law. I think it's such a critical time of change in the family law space at the moment. And I've started a really exciting role with AFES in the family law, family violence and elder abuse research team as well. So that's how I got here today.
Yeah, terrific. Yeah, well, welcome. Looking forward to your presentation shortly. So thanks, Emily. Yeah, and Roxanne, welcome to you as well. You've been involved in this area for some time as well. How come? What is it that continues to draw you to this field of practice?
Hi, Chris, and I'm just really continuously hungry for it. And every family that I see and every new piece of research that comes out, I just get more and more excited about what can be done to help support families. And then when I get young people particularly that come back to me and they say, you really understood me in a way and were able to translate that to my parents in a way that they understood, that's what keeps me here. Absolutely.
Right, that feedback from children, yeah, really reinforcing some of those things. Yeah, terrific. Yeah. Thanks, Roxanne. Yeah, we look forward to hearing from you as well in a little while. So welcome to you, and welcome, Felicity. Great to have you a part of this presentation as well. Felicity, you've been lending your voice and advocating for children and families in many different contexts, I guess. Yeah, how come that's important to you to sort of bring that expertise, to that area?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I guess for me, as a peer support worker in the child protection system, supporting families around child removal, I'm also a parent with lived experience through many years stuff, drug and alcohol, child protection, disability, DV, and what I have found is that the parent's voice isn't heard enough. So I really got this passion to come across these things and let the parent's voice be heard.
Great. Well, yeah, again, we're looking forward to hearing your contribution as well. So thanks for being a part of today. Okay, well, I reckon we should proceed. So why don't we move on? And Emily, over to you in terms of responding to this issue. So thanks very much, Emily.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Emily, and I'm a research officer at AFES, working in the Family Law, Family Violence and Elder Abuse Research team. And I'll be speaking with you today about the Institute's research on how to speak with separating parents about their children's wellbeing. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Nicola Balvin and Nicole Patterson, who conducted this research as well. And just before I get into the substantive talk, I wanted to make it clear that the insights that I'll be sharing with you today aren't intended to replace any professional training, but rather to help you think about the scope of your practice and how you can incorporate child-focused practice into your roles. I also just want to flag that some resources will also be made available to you today, either in the chat or in the handouts functions there. And you can refer to that for more detailed information if you need it as I go through. So now what I want to do is to split my talk into 3 key areas because they're all interconnected and equally important in supporting children's wellbeing. So the first area is how we can support parents through separation. The second is how we can support children through the separation process. And finally, I'll talk a bit more about supporting families affected by family violence and the complexities around that so you can follow along. But before that, I'd just like to introduce you to some key concepts, set a bit of a context, and talk a little bit about the research itself. So firstly, I just wanted to introduce you to the concept of wellbeing, as this is really central to the conversation today. So wellbeing refers to social and emotional wellbeing, which includes mental health, as well as social, behavioural and emotional development for children. And next, child-centered practice refers to keeping the child in focus throughout a given process and ensuring that their point of view is taken into account when making decisions. So we know that separation is a highly challenging, stressful and emotional time for families. And we know that children's wellbeing during separation is influenced by a variety of factors, including the level of conflict between parents and the quality of the child-parent relationship. Research indicates that negative impacts on children in relation to separation are not necessarily due to the separation itself, but due to the various things that happen around separation, which may include things like parental conflict. But during this really difficult period, parents are distressed and are experiencing grief and loss and may not be as capable of picking up on cues of social wellbeing from their children. And this is where practitioners come into the picture. So practitioners are sometimes the first people that separating parents speak to during this really difficult time. So it's important that this is used as an opportunity to understand how parents and children can be supported appropriately. And even though practitioners may not be specifically trained in family dispute resolution or counselling, it's important that in their roles they ask parents about their children's wellbeing and refer to specialised services as required. But how we frame these questions about children's wellbeing is really important, and that's one of the key messages I want you to take home today. It's important to acknowledge that parental distress may also be shaped by broader structural issues like socioeconomic status, and this is also why it's important for practitioners to frame questions in a compassionate and non-judgmental way. So in this research, 24 professionals from a range of health and community roles, 4 parents with lived experience of separation, and 3 specialised professionals working in family dispute resolution were consulted. And I'll reflect on some of their insights as I go through the talk today as well. So now I'll move on to focus on what practitioners can do to support parents. So some parents we spoke with reported that they didn't seek support from any practitioners during the period of separation due to fear of being judged. So it's really important to focus on discussing the parents' wellbeing before diving in and asking questions about the children. Be honest about what the scope of your role is and what you can and cannot do for parents as well. And while you might not be able to give advice and solve specific problems, you can refer on to appropriate services. And I'll talk more about that as I go through. So to start with, how do you go about starting a conversation? So allow parents the opportunity to self-reflect first by asking broad, open-ended questions. So things like, how are you going with everything? What are you noticing about yourself since you made the decision to separate? And these questions are really useful because the way they're framed sends a signal to parents that their experiences are important as well. And allowing parents to speak about themselves can provide them with a sense of ease and help them relax a little bit in this context. You can also promote and encourage self-care by checking in if parents are sleeping, eating well and exercising, connecting with others, and seeking support for their mental health. It's also really useful to make it clear to parents that they're actually supporting their children by looking after their own health and well-being and engaging in self-care strategies. You can also acknowledge what the parent is doing really well. So for example, something along the lines of you're doing a really great job looking after the children on your own. You can also normalise feelings of pain, grief and loss and acknowledge that these feelings are a completely normal response to such a distressing experience such as separation. So you can say something along the lines of, it's important to understand that going through separation is a really significant process of grief and loss, and it can make it harder to be the parent that we want to be, and that's completely normal. You can ask about the supports that parents currently have available to them. So you can ask who is in your life that you can talk to about these things right now, and who supports you. Next, focus on solutions without actually providing solutions outside the scope of your own practice. So you can ask things like, what do you think would be most helpful for you right now? And how can you get more of this support? And you can also share resources on self-care, and that's available in the Emerging Minds resource that I'm speaking about today. And you can look at that, some really good strategies there and some resources you can share. And so with that, I'd like to talk a little bit more in depth about how we support children through separation. So once you've provided the opportunity for parents to speak a bit about how they're going and what they need, you can open up a bit more to what the children's needs are. So we know that many children experience complex emotions around separation, including sadness, anger, fear, confusion, and guilt. However, parents told us that in their engagement with a range of practitioners, their children were very rarely asked about or even addressed if the child was present at the appointment. So how do you promote child wellbeing in these conversations? So you can start again by asking very general open-ended questions like, can you tell me a little bit about your children and what makes each of them unique and special? This is really useful because it helps to signal that you understand that the parent has expert knowledge of their own children and what their needs are. Once parents have opened up a little bit, you can then ask more specifically about the children's experience of separation by asking things like, what have the children told you about how they're feeling lately? And what changes, if any, have you noticed in your children? And you can provide information for separating parents and their children. So providing resources on things like how they can support wellbeing, tips for how to manage conflict, and we've included some links in that Emerging Minds resource that will be made available to you as well, so you can look through that. And what's really important is providing referrals to specialist services for separating parents and their children. So first, have a bit of a think about any connections that you might have with allied health and other services. Could you make a phone call on the parent's behalf, or could you help them with paperwork, things like that? And the Australian government provides a range of services for separated parents, including family dispute resolution, family counselling, educational programs around divorce and separation, co-parenting programs and children's programs as well. And these programs can typically be accessed at family relationship centres like Relationships Australia and Centrecare, where parents can be referred to for assistance with many aspects of their separation and co-parenting journeys. And there are a range of services available, not just limited to family relationship centres, and there are links as well in that resource that you can refer to. Okay, so now I'd like to move on and talk a bit more about separation involving family violence, because this is much more complex in nature. And all practitioners should be familiar with mandatory reporting of child abuse and neglect in their state or territory, and making this limit to confidentiality in your discussions to parents is really important in making them feel more comfortable in those discussions. And you can also look into that resource for more information on mandatory reporting. So as I suggested, support and assistance for parents and children affected by family violence is really complex, and it may include a range of different needs, and including therapy for victims, finding housing, financial assistance, legal support, psychological support, and family violence services as well. And a relationship counsellor that we consulted stated, and this is a quote, so they stated, "There is absolutely no harm that if a GP or another practitioner is very worried about their client and they can see that they are not doing okay, that they ask about their safety. Women in domestic violence situations sometimes need someone to say, I'm actually really worried about your safety and I have to do something and I'm going to call this person and this person." Women affected by family violence are in such survival mode that they often don't think, how can I make the steps to move out of this situation? It becomes, I need to survive, literally getting from the bed to the bathroom. So how do you start a conversation, and what are some of the approaches that you can take? So slowly building up to asking about family violence if you suspect it may be happening, by asking broad questions like, how is everyone in the family coping? Has anyone else expressed to you that they are really worried about you? And then bring the children into the focus by asking something like, how are your children coping? Do you think that they are feeling safe? And there's also a full list of questions from Emerging Minds in that resource that's available to you as well to have a look at for some ideas. And it's important to discuss help and support. So as I suggested, parents affected by family violence need various kinds of support to cope with the situation. So try talking about what they might need to improve that situation by asking things like, what do you find helps you and how can you get more of this support? And the next really important step is making appropriate referrals. So to do this, make inquiries about the types of services that the parent might need, as these can range from, as I suggested, referrals to family violence services, to housing, to legal or financial support. And it may take a bit of extra effort, but see if you can make a call and provide brochures and phone numbers and things like that. And be sure to follow up with them at a later point to check in on them. Okay, so with that, I'd just like to provide a bit of a summary and some final thoughts. So some of the key points that I'd like you to take home today is to always think about how you're framing your questions to and about parents and their children, making sure that the questions come from a place of inquiry and, of course, compassion. And on this note, I'd encourage you to check out a recent CFCA webinar, which delves into framing in quite a bit of depth, and it's called Shifting Mindsets, How Communication Can Shape Early Childhood Outcomes. So yeah, that's a really great resource to start thinking about how we frame our questions. Next, adopt a child-centered approach to practice and always bring children's wellbeing into focus, even if the conversation isn't directly about them. And in cases where there is family violence, some additional effort may be required in providing referrals, arranging appointments, making calls, and providing information. And I wanted to emphasize as well that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and every parent and child are different and experiencing different emotions, all of which are valid. And with that, I'll just leave you now with a quote from one of the parents we consulted. And she told us, have some compassion and empathy. Stop and think and put yourself in that person's shoes and just question, how would this be for you? So you have a little understanding of what that parent is feeling in that moment that they're coming to you, that everything is not great and that things can be hard. And here they are having to trust somebody, giving that person some time, but also questioning, how can I help other than giving the standard little bit? How can I go that little bit further? Thank you. Now I'd like to pass on to Roxanne.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. That's really comprehensive information about how we can. I think what I appreciated was just your real intent to ensure that compassionate, non-blaming, non-stigmatizing approach when working with parents, asking about their well-being first, and then scaffolding into an interest in their children's well-being, of course. So yeah, thanks very much for sharing your learnings around that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And over to you, Roxanne. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Emily, because I think a lot of what you've said I'm hoping to expand on in my my conversation today, or my part of the webinar today, and it was all really important to hear. So I've got some slides that are going to be available as a handout as well, and there's a resource page at the end as well for everyone who's listening today. So I'm the team leader for Counselling Services at Relationships Australia. I am a family dispute resolution practitioner, a social worker, a child inclusive practitioner, counsellor, family therapist and conflict coach. And really what that means is I get this wonderful job of working with families around the time of separation and post-separation with the idea of supporting repair and supporting the best outcomes for their children. I'm really lucky to work in an organisation where child focus is at the core of what we do, and that we are, as Emily said, really co-located with so many other programs to support families at this really special time. The thing that I want to say is that complex family situations shouldn't be the job of one person to manage, and it does take a village. Don't feel that it should be on your shoulders as a practitioner or as a GP or any one individual. So the impacts of separation on children. Since 2005, there have been several research papers written on this topic, and they all agree that it's not parental separation that hurts children and young people, it's the unresolved and ongoing conflict. This type of unresolved ongoing conflict eats away at the foundation of a child and affects their mental health along their lifespan. Where parents involve their children in the separation, either emotionally, physically, as a decision maker, this is toxic for children and young people to be part of. Parents are so often operating through a lens of grief and loss after separation, and there are times when they need to be supported to keep these feelings placed with other adults in the sphere of influence or professionals, and to keep a clear child-focused message with their children. Often the language in the family law system is about co-parenting. Co-parenting is only possible when parents share goodwill with each other, and for anyone who might not have heard those terms before, co-parenting is a parenting style in which both parents continue to jointly participate in their children's upbringing and activities, and it does involve a substantial amount of interaction between parents, both publicly and privately. And in order for it to work, both parents need to really be committed to maintaining goodwill and setting aside any differences for the benefit of their children. Where there is a higher level of conflict between parents, parallel parenting is a parenting style which involves limited interaction between parents and an agreement that children will be safely parented with the parent that they're with at the allocated time, with limited interaction from either parent. And this is to ultimately protect the children from the conflict. Larger issues are generally resolved within mediation or within family law, and contact generally happens with email, or there's a defined type of contact that will occur. And this style of parenting works best because other areas of the separation have guidelines in place, such as who pays for extracurricular activities, schools, etc. Schools being decided on, for example. There is a booklet that I've attached as a resource at the end of the presentation, and it's called Because It's for the Kids. It's written by Dr. Jennifer McIntosh, who is a renowned researcher and practitioner in this sector. It's written for parents and explains the different considerations post-separation to keep children and young people free from conflict. I've also included a link to a series of videos that Raza commissioned with Dr. Jennifer McIntosh specifically about conflict. The videos are called the Let's Talk About It series. They're made for parents, so working with parents in child-centered ways. I think that the biggest thing I'd like you to take from this section is that kids don't reject parents, they reject a situation. And the beautiful thing is that kids really need their parents and their extended families, and any damage done by ongoing conflict, it can be repaired, but parents need to be willing to do the work to repair it. A developmental apology is one of the biggest, strongest, wisest, kindest things that a parent can do for their children if the separation has become coloured by conflict. When we talk about separation, it's important to let parents know that arguments that are resolved don't damage children. In fact, they teach children how to negotiate different situations and to show that people won't always get along. It's the conflict that's unresolved and that keeps being unresolved that we're talking about today. Professor Bruce Smythe from the Australian National University is one of the lead researchers in this field also, and he found that children can be highly adaptable and resilient to living between two homes after separation, as long as there's a really clear routine and stability. As long as children know that every Monday mum picks me up from school and that we have spaghetti for dinner, and dad takes me to basketball practice every Wednesday, and Thursdays I go to OSH and so on, it takes the guesswork out of being a separated child. This is really important information for parents because it simplifies sort of their to-do list post-separation when so many things are changing around them. The young people age group between sort of 14 to 16 so often need more flexibility than the younger children do. They need to know they can talk about the other parent and that things they enjoyed without feeling like they're hurting or letting down the other parent. They want to do things such as staying at mum's house on a weekend because a social event is closer to their home, even if it may not be that parent's particular weekend. Helping parents to process and hold on to feelings of their kids when they return from one parent to when they return from the other parent is another key consideration to children as well, being kept emotionally safe in the separation. Helping parents to understand this through metaphor can help them to make a sense of putting this into action. I really have sort of two go-to metaphors that I will often use when it comes to talking to families about this. One is the idea of rocks in a backpack. So all of us have little backpacks on that we carry around with us, and they're generally filled with things that might happen to us or worries. And right now, your child's backpack's really full and they're struggling to walk. And as parents and as your support people, what we want to do is try and take some of those rocks out so life gets a little bit easier. And the other one is referring more to the attachment system of the child when moving between houses and situations. Children and young people, the one that I use for this situation is children and young people are similar to an iPhone. When they leave their attachment figure, they're on full charge. And as they go through the day and they go through situations, their battery runs low. And by the time they get to the attachment figure, they're often on 1%. And this is where they need to dock back in with you and recharge. And that happens through routine. And routine is, you know, something really simple like reading a book together or having a meal together when they get home and they can top that battery up with you. I use this one because it's really easy and relatable because we all live with our phones in our pockets. So working with parental distress. If the distress of a parent is due to family and domestic violence, cultural considerations or child safety concerns, these require separate considerations and separate risk management. Your organisation may have a risk assessment tool. At Relationships Australia, we use what's called the Family Law Doors, and I have included a link to that if you'd like more information on the resource page. You can also use something really simple like the Family Safety Framework as well, which is available via your police website in your state. And it just has a list of questions that can really clearly go through those risks. If the risks have been dealt with and the parent that you're talking to is coming from a place of the distress is coming from another place, hear that person out. Just let them tell their story without judgment. Help them to focus in on the things that are most worrying for them. It might be how to navigate living together for a little while longer because they might need to be separated under the same roof financially for a little while. It could be the emotions of the children. It could be where to go for information. If you do have capacity, as Emily said earlier, to offer a warm referral to a partner agency, or if you have capacity to check in on how a referral went and if that referral did help, there are times where parents may need that ongoing support to navigate the separation, and this is best supported through a multiple of things, through counselling, through case management support, through the support of various organisations or various practitioners within one organisation as well. And counselling can help them to provide a space to talk about their distress and talk about their worries as well. And this is just the resource slide, which I spoke about during the presentation. So that has all the bits and pieces that I spoke about, and they're all freely available for you to look at. Thank you. I'm handing over to Felicity now.
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. Thanks very much for that. I love the sort of this phrase about taking the guesswork out of separation for children, and those how that can invite parents to be thinking really carefully about establishing those routines and those you know, really resonant everyday metaphors. I think are really some helpful practices as well. So thanks very much for sharing your experience with us. And Yeah, and Felicity, over to you. Yeah, what's important from your perspective and from what you've learned in talking with many parents going through separation? Yeah, what is it that you think practitioners should be really clear about?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You know, I work in an organisation where I'm the president and I do peer support work. So I interact with families all the time that don't have children in their care due to child protection. You know, and all I keep hearing when they're distressed is that I love my child and I just want my child home. And I guess, you know, same thing I hear from children. Children want their parents in their life one way or another, if that is, you know, living at one house, mum's house or dad's house, and then going to see the other parent. I guess working with parents in distress, you know, my biggest tip is when meeting a parent, meet them for the first time. You know, don't come in with a judgment of what this parent looks like, if that is from documents or from the other parent, you know, come in being non-judgmental. Remembering these guys are human and they're going through one of the biggest lots of emotions they'll ever will. So sometimes, you know, meeting a parent that's angry, we can quite often say we can't work with this parent due to them being angry. But we need to stop and think, you know, why is this parent angry? You know, they don't have their child in their life. It might be mum that's had their child every day, you know, for multiple years, and all of a sudden the child's not living with mum. So we need to remember that parents are going to go through different emotions. They're going to go through grief and loss, you know, and when maybe you first start talking to them, they might not be ready to have a conversation. They might not be confident to open up. But that doesn't mean give up on that parent either. You know, I guess the other side of it is also is, you know, parents talking badly of each other. So if the same service is going to help mum and dad, you know, keeping an open mind, and trying not to take what mum has said about dad and judging dad. You know, I know for me, my son's father had full custody of my son, and I would have to go to the daycare to pick him up on the days that I was allowed to have him, and I'd feel really uncomfortable. And there was days that I didn't want to do that stuff because I felt like when I walked in that I was judged because I wasn't the parent that had full care of my son. You know, and I didn't know what was discussed by the father to the educators. So I felt really, really uncomfortable until one day I had a conversation with them. And after that, everything changed. You know, I felt like I was treated with respect and I got treated just like dad, you know, and there's many, many stories I can sit here and talk about, you know, the same type of thing, you know, child protection when a child's removed, parents feel like have no say anymore over their children, that they're judged, they get looked at like they don't love their children, they get looked like they're angry parents and we can't work with them. And what these parents say is, you know, we love our children. And I guess for me, that's a huge one. What we've got to remember, you know, love is shown in all different ways. There's not just one way that a parent shows they love their children. I guess you know, working with distressed parents or like anybody, like they're human beings, and taking the time to listen to what they've got to say. You know, not just sitting there telling people what they need or may need, but just sitting there and having an honest conversation, being really straight up and straightforward in a loving, caring, compassionate way. You know, would really, really work. And I believe coming across with that attitude with empathy and compassion that you would get a lot further with parents. You know, I heard mandatory reporting used, you know, earlier on. Having them conversations with family when that's going to happen, and sit down with family where possible and doing that together and raising what concerns there is. You know, if mum or dad, if there is any concerns, because sometimes parents aren't aware of their behaviours and actions. You know, like I said at the beginning, that I have many different types of lived experiences throughout the field, and I know myself, sometimes I'm not aware of things until other people point it out, you know, and once people point it out, I'm quite willing to look at that stuff and You know, I really want to know how to change certain defects, but the issue is I don't know where to go. So what I try to do with other parents is be there to be able to help them navigate different services, you know, because sometimes while we're trying to keep our emotions in check and deal with our emotions, you know, we were not able to do everything else that is needed. So sometimes we need a support person that can go, you know what, I know this service that can help. You know what, Felicity, go to Relationship Australia to get some parenting groups, get some counselling, you know, be that kind human. Parents don't need to face another challenge. They're already going through the biggest challenge of their life. And I guess when working with parents, ask yourself, am I going to hinder this parent? And am I going to be able to offer the best I can to this parent? And if you're not going to be able to give your all and, you know, and be a positive influence in this parent's life to help them, hand that stuff off to somebody else that can. Because if we can help the parents be the best version of themselves, then the children gets the best parents. So helping parents help children, you know. So I look at it, if I can get mum and dad to the best version of themselves, and if that's just being a listening post or being there to support or being a voice when needed, you know, that's the stuff I will do. You know, and it's all through different fields. Parents can face all different challenges: disability, education, child protection, family law, you know, all sorts of things. And all throughout that, the biggest thing a parent needs is somebody backing them in their corner, you know, someone helping them have these discussions. So I guess, you know, if I want to leave you guys with anything, it really is that parents are human beings and they're trying their hardest in the moment with what they know, you know. And I guess if you just stop and think for a moment, if you the way you come across to a parent and you're there for a parent, would you like somebody else treating your family like that or your loved one? And if it's yes, then keep going. And if it's no, check in on what can I do? What aren't I doing? And you know, I heard it today already. Not always giving people the answers, asking the parent, what do you need? How are you? You know, how is your day? What are you going to do to look after yourself today? You know, that self-care stuff. You know, sometimes it's not, we don't just need the answers. You know, we just really need somebody to listen to and to help navigate. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Felicity. Yeah, some really significant reflections and learnings that you're sharing with us. So thank you for that. Gee, that story about attending that service and just feeling judged just by rocking up, which made it hard for you to even want to go sometimes, I think was pretty significant in terms of you know, what is it that services and practitioners can do to make even turning up just a fraction easier for parents. I think that was can be significant for us to be thinking about. And even, you know, when you spoke about helping parents be the best version of themselves, so then, you know, they can in turn be the best parent, so that children's well-being can be attended to. Yeah, really important. So thanks, yeah, so much for those insights. And so. And also thank you to all of you who are submitting questions as well for our panel. Yeah, there's a number of them coming through, and quite a few, and as well as some others. Thank you to those that submitted questions prior to the webinar. So we're going to seek to respond to some of those now. So I'd like to invite yeah, Emily and Roxanne again to join us. And in fact, Roxanne, there's a question that's come through when you were speaking about, you know, how unresolved conflicts that can have negative implications for kids. And someone's just asked, could you say a little bit more about some of those, about the types of unresolved conflicts and, you know, the effects that does have on children? I guess these are important themes for us to be alert to, isn't it? It helps us notice this more in families.
Yeah, absolutely. So unresolved conflict is the conflict that, what's the like kind of most anecdotal way I can describe it? I guess it's the dislike. Often what I see as a practitioner, it's the dislike of the other parent. So a parent is grieving because of whatever has happened prior to separation, and it's the You know, oh, if your mum didn't do this, then this thing would happen. If your dad didn't do this, then this thing would be happening. Or it's the conversation about money. Well, you can't go to basketball because mum's taken all my money in child support. Like, that is so often the thing that I hear. That's the ongoing conflict that really erodes that young person's identity. And it is so toxic for young people to be part of, because those are adult things that can get sorted out with other professionals, with other people in your family, etc. when you're feeling that way about that situation. But when you give that for your child to hold, what happens to that little person is they start to go, well, what does that mean about me? You know, if mum doesn't like dad anymore, or dad doesn't like mum anymore, well, I'm part of both of them. So am I still liked? Am I? And that's what starts to happen. It starts to get bigger and bigger. So that's what I mean by the toxic ongoing conflict. And it can get a million times worse than that, of course, but that's sort of something quite anecdotal that I think most people will kind of understand from their interactions that they're having with families as well.
And just to follow up to that, and I'd like to ask the others as well about that, but just I was thinking how is it possible to help parents see some of the effects of those ways of talking?
Yeah, just really simply, like when we let a parent tell their story, it might be asking them a simple question like, you know, why do you think your child needed to hear that piece of information? Or, you know, can they actually affect whether or not their basketball fees get paid for? And sometimes it's just those simple things that the parent goes, oh, you're right, that didn't need to come out for that thing, or, you know, in that conversation. And then it would be going into that parent to say, you know, that's really sticking with you. Can we talk about that? Can I be the person that talks to you about that particular thing? Let's get it off your chest.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Felicity, do you have something to add to that in terms of how what it is that can perhaps help parents realise they're not being the best version of themselves, and therefore, you know, the impacts that's having on their children?
Yeah, I guess, you know, as I was saying earlier, is that being straight up and being very honest with the parent. You know, I find, you know, parents love honesty as much as it may hurt sometimes, but making them totally aware, asking them the questions. Do you understand this is what's going on and this is how it's affecting your children? You know, just being really straight up, but also at the same time is, I guess, you know, it's the way your tone, the language you use, making sure they're understanding what you're saying, because there's been times people have had conversations with me and I've walked away going, I don't know what I've just agreed to. I don't know what they've just said to me. And hopefully I agreed to something good. You know, and, you know, just really unpacking that with the parents about what type of defects they are, because as I said, you know, some things can be so ingrained in us that we think it's the right way, but everybody else can clearly see that it's not the right way and it's not the best for the children, you know, but we believe that, you know, so really unpacking that stuff with the parent, getting them to a point that they actually understand.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you to both of you. There's another question around maybe, Emily, how can we best support children with separating parents who are also involved in the court system? And again, yeah, Roxanne, Felicity might have something to say about that as well. But yeah, Emily, for you, what kind of comes to mind for you about that?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So it's really important that children have access to their own targeted support. I think so this could mean from school counsellors, psychologists, and the children and young people in separated family study undertaken by AFES found that children didn't really feel listened to as much by family law professionals. So this means that practitioners play a really vital role in supporting young people. Young people also reported not feeling heard, and they wanted their parents to listen more to their views on living arrangements. So this support from practitioners, was really important in helping them through that difficult period. So having that really targeted support is really important. I'm not sure if Felicity or Roxanne want to speak more to that.
Yeah, so yeah, like, look, this is part of my work, is supporting people at a courthouse through child protection, and the idea of doing this was, the biggest idea was so the parent knew they weren't alone. They had somebody, just as a child as well, because any of us can walk into a courtroom and be very overwhelmed, very fearful, not knowing what's going to happen, so basically, the first principle was so these people weren't alone, that you could sit there and you could listen and you could ask them questions simply, how are you feeling today? Is there like anything you want to chat about? Because the more we isolate people, the more damage that gets done. So if we can support as much as we can, brings out that isolation. It has somebody in their corner. So I guess, for me, it is that big understanding. And as Emily said, kids feel like they're not being heard, they're not being listened to. Very same with the parents. Exactly the same thing is, I get quotes. I've travelled around Australia asking parents these type of questions, and it is simply they say, I'm not being heard, I'm not being understood, I'm not being worked with, no one's listening to me, I don't have a voice.
I completely agree with what you both said, and I think one of the things that I often, if I'm sitting in my role as a mediator, what I'll normally say to families is, mediation is that tool where you can come in and you can talk about how to make a plan that's going to suit your family and your family how it looks right now. If you go to the court are going to deliver something to you that's going to be, the court's there for a really critically important reason, but the court's going to give you something that's going to be potentially not what anyone really wants, but it's going to be the thing that they think is best for you and your children at this point in time. It won't necessarily be something that you as a family feel is the best for you right now. And I think that's where also the child's voice can come in a very different way, because we can do that child inclusive practice, and we can even potentially refer clients on to family therapy or other situations where they might have more ability to discuss what's actually happening for them as a family, as a separated family.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for all of you for that. There's been a question actually around working with indigenous families in the context of separation, and actually, Roxanne, I was wondering if you could say something about your organisation's kind of approach to that, and yeah, given the complexity of us responding to that kind of question, is there something you could say about your organisation's approach to that?
Yeah, I think that really importantly, everything that's been said today, whether you are culturally diverse, gender diverse, all of these principles are the same. It's principles of inquiry, of compassion, of meeting the client where they are and wanting to help them as an individual human in the world, rather than it being anything to do with. And clients are the expert on their culture. So asking, one of the first questions that's on family law doors, for example, is, tell me, is there anything important about your culture or religion that you need me to know? So that's a really easy starting question as well. In working particularly with Indigenous families, there's obviously so much complexity around privilege, trauma, colonisation and the effect of ongoing colonisation on the Indigenous population of the country. And so there's lots of different programs that can help, programs that are run through Ngukurr Unity, programs that are run through, for example, we have what's called Natuwicha, which is the program that we have around family group conferencing. A lot of those programs are also tied in with child protection as well, but the idea is, let's get everyone in to discuss, everyone who's important to this child, let's get them all in to discuss how we can ongoingly support this child, support this family, empower families to make better, safer choices for their children. So it depends on where you're seeing this family, within what system you're seeing this family, a family law system, a child protection system, etc. But lean on the other practitioners that you might have. And if you don't have any practitioners in your particular workplace, by all means, call Relationships Australia. We have people that can help have those discussions with you. Call Ngukurr Unity. They'll have people that you can have these discussions with to help support the family that you're working with.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Thank you, Roxanne, for that. There's some other questions in relation to helping parents or highlighting children's needs and experiences in relation to working with parents. A question in relation to this notion of like, how do you strike a balance between repair and respecting the voice of the child? You know, particularly when a child is not wanting to see another parent, you know, has taken a position around not wanting to see another parent. Yeah, do you have some ways to navigate through that? Yeah, Felicity, are there things that come to mind for you for that, or Emily, Roxanne?
Yeah, you know, I really like this question. You know, like I said, I'm a parent with lived experience, and very briefly, I lost my children 10 years ago to the child protection system due to I was unable to parent my children due to drug and alcohol and all different. I was a child of the child protection system, etc. You know, 5 years ago, I got 2 of my children back home, and 1 remained in long-term care. And just today, I had a guardianship conversation with the courts, and it was around exactly this. How do we work with my son without forcing him to do something that he does not want to do? You know, and as a parent, don't get me wrong, my first emotion is my son needs to come and see me when I want because I love him and I need my emotional cup filled. You know, but reality is that's not the case. Reality is I will listen to what that little boy wants. I will not push him into doing something he doesn't want. And then I will try and work with his psychologist on how do we actually do this stuff, you know, at his pace when he's ready. How do I work with him around this stuff? I'll call in my support people, you know, from my work and ask, how do I do this stuff? Do you have any advice? And I'll just keep calling in people, but I will not push him through that stuff. And there might be a big, you know, people's opinion might be that parents just want what's best for them. But at the end of the day, us parents can put our emotion aside and really give what the child actually needs. And, you know, and sometimes that's time and space and just bearing with them.
Thank you, Felicity. Yeah, Roxanne, do you have any other sort of encouragements to practitioners in those circumstances, responding to those circumstances?
I think they're 2 separate things as well, Chris. Repair and hearing the voice and holding the voice of the child as sacred are actually 2 separate things. And it's a bit like, I kind of, the thing that's popping into my mind is the idea that First Nations people and reconciliation. First Nations people have nothing to reconcile. So I kind of think of it in the same kind of context. The children are not responsible for the repair, the adults are responsible for the repair. Holding the voice of the children and helping a parent, empowering a parent to understand this is how your little person through their 8, 10, 14-year-old lens of the world sees what happened. How can you come in and say, I tried the best that I could in that situation, and you're right, maybe I didn't get it right, but how can we bridge that gap?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's really yeah, inviting the parents to be thinking about some possibilities for the action they can take here in relation to it, rather than sort of what the kid can be doing differently, so to speak.
Yeah.
And Chris, can I just add on that? You know, around what a child wants. I have teenage girls at home. I have a 17-year-old, just about an adult, and I have a 16-year-old daughter. So sometimes I've got to weigh up exactly what they want to how much of a decision I make and how much I be forceful in that decision. So, you know, the everyday life, I don't want to go to school. Well, you're going to school. You know, so, you know, really looking at what is it the child wants to how much I'm actually there doing the parental, this is what needs to happen and we're going to do it like this, to, okay, I'm hearing this stuff and I'm going to do this and follow your lead as well. So, you know, it's weighing that stuff up as well.
Great, yes. Thank you, Felicity. I'm mindful of the time. We've got a couple more minutes left, folks. And there's been some questions coming about fathers, actually. And Emily, if there's something that's kind of come through for you from the research that you've been a part of and involved with as well, as Felicity and Roxanne, around how to better support dads that are in distress during these times? What's important? Emily, I'm guessing that much of what you spoke about kind of can also be applied to fathers facing these tough times as well. Are there sort of any distinctions to draw there, or others?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think what Felicity mentioned in her talk really stuck with me was, parents can be angry, present as angry, our dads can present as angry, and it's sort of understanding that that's not personal. That's, of course, they're angry if things are going on behind the scenes and we don't know. And it's just, working through those layers and trying to keep asking questions. I think, as Felicity mentioned, keep asking questions till you get the right one, to sort of help them open up a bit. And again, in my talk, suggesting how we frame things, I think, is really important, especially for men, who it's harder to open up for a lot of men. Being really non-judgmental in how we speak, and asking about them first, I think, and how they're going, because and signaling that they're important as well. Is really important.
Yeah, I guess they might come with some preconceived ideas that they might be down the pecking order of importance kind of thing for services, given the way services are frequently portrayed. So seeking to counter some of those ideas, from what you're saying. Great, thanks. Was there anything else you'd like to add, Roxanne or Felicity, to what Emily's commented on?
Yeah, the only two things, because I know that we're running out of time, the only two things that I'd like to add to that are, if anyone's looking for information about how to support dads, anything by David Mandel or the Supporting Fathers Victoria Relationships Australia website are both really good places to start. And the biggest thing I'd say is protective factors for dad. Are they connected in other ways to the world? Do they have a friendship group? Do they have, do they play tennis regularly? Something like that. A protective factor that would mean that this time when things are really tough and they might be feeling judged or shamed or something like that, that they are connected in with something else as well.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add is that, as Emily was saying, keep chatting to dad and do you find the right question to ask, but also sometimes you're not the person to speak to that dad. Maybe it is somebody else. A service like mine, we run morning teas for parents. I know it's around child protection, but we run a morning tea for parents by parents. We run workshops for parents written by parents. Sometimes it is we hand it over to someone with the similar lived experience where they can connect, and they're on a different ground. So sometimes it is handing it over to a peer support worker or putting them to groups ran by other parents.
Okay, there's some other questions we're going to seek to respond to now. There's been a number that have actually come through in relation to how to respond to separated parents who are talking badly about the other parent to you as a practitioner. And I guess this can be a difficult spot to be in at times.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly, I've had that experience many, many times where two people are using, either denigrating language about the other party, or they're using, really quite upfront language that's potentially inappropriate about the other person. Kind of depending on the context, I might just talk to, and depending on the context of my role with that family as well. But again, using those questions of inquiry, I can see that that's really upsetting you. Tell me a bit more about that. Or I can see that's an area of real pain for you. Do you have a counsellor or somebody that you can actually talk a bit more about that issue with?
And just to add to that, I'd probably also just ask the parent, what part of this is affecting you? What part of this person's behaviour or what they're saying is actually affecting you, and to why? Or what part do you have in this, if there's a part that they have in this? And just keep bringing it back to them. Why is this affecting you, and trying to work on that instead of getting too involved in the whole he said, she said stuff. And I guess also just remembering, if I'm going to speak to the other party, if I can't be neutral, to get somebody else to speak to the other party, not jump in there just hoping that, I'm there going to fix everything and I can work this all out, making sure that I do call upon somebody when I'm not capable.
Yeah, completely agree, Felicity and Roxanne. I think bringing it back to that parent that you're speaking with, asking about them and who supports you, what is really helpful for you right now. I think just bringing it back to that parent is really important.
Great, thank you. What about, there's some questions in relation to when parents like use a child to be vengeful towards another parent. Yes, I guess this could become apparent to you in your conversations with parents, can't it, how that's happening, or even with the child. But say in working with a parent when that's going on, yeah, what are some ways of responding to making sense of that, and responding to that?
Yeah, I actually had this exact conversation with a client the other day and it's a situation where I'm only dealing with one parent and the children. I'm not dealing with the other separated parent because of how they've come into our organisation. And one parent is sending messages to the children, and the children are coming home and saying, well, Dad says that's your fault, or Mum says that's because you're not, doing such and such, and it's quite targeted attacks. And I think my role has been to really help that parent understand that the children can't, if this particular parent wants to kind of justify her actions and how they are different to the other parent, that's equally not helpful for the children to actually make sense of all of that. So one of the best things parents can do in that situation is to say, you know what, Mummy and Daddy do think differently about a lot of things, and that's one of the reasons why we're not together. So I think that's just something where we think differently, and then just sort of trying to move on, because that's something that kids can make sense of, and it doesn't drag the other person in to what they're trying to do.
Thank you. There's some other questions in relation to how to help parents untangle their issues with their ex from their children's relationship with the other parent. I wonder if it might be a similar vein to that question I just asked, but how to help parents untangle those different issues. What becomes important in doing that, do you think?
I think for me, working with parents is getting them to identify, is there a part for them to help detangle this? Or is it just actually the other party? So sometimes us parents can take on more than what we should be owning ourselves. And we believe, there's a lot more that we've done or haven't done. So sometimes, the onus isn't actually on that one parent. So making sure that I'm fixing my side of the fence as best as possible, and I'm still being available there to help where I can. But yeah, not getting involved in something that I'm not involved in. Like, if my ex is, a perpetrator, it's not my responsibility to untangle that. And it's actually my safety to stay away from that and not re-traumatize myself or my family. So making sure I don't take the responsibility of other people, and making sure other people take the responsibility for their own stuff.
Yeah. So a practitioner like having conversations with parents so that kind of helps that make that clearer, where the responsibility lies, perhaps to be doing the untangling or that kind
Definitely.
of thing. Is that important?
Yeah, and it's especially if that practitioner has the skills to actually do that. And again, if we're not skilled to do that, put this to somebody else, ask someone else to take this away. Because what we've got to remember is that these are very important lives we're playing with. When we're working with a family, we're working with mum, dad, child, whoever. These are very important people and big decisions that will change children for life and will change the parents for life. So really just being really careful that we're there doing the best we can and we're not hindering them.
It's a question in relation to different sets of rules between, say, mum's place and dad's place that children have to navigate through. And, so it can be seen as, the person uses the term good cop, bad cop kind of situation. So what's important to sort of be letting parents know about who might be concerned about their children having to find ways through the different rules?
This goes back to sort of what I was talking about, parallel parenting. And there's some really good articles that I included in the resource section, particularly from Bruce Smyth, because he's done a lot of research into this. And the anecdote that we use a lot is what we call the ice cream story. So at one parent's house, a child can have any ice cream flavour, any day of the week, any time of the day, doesn't matter, ice cream on tap. And at the other house, there's no ice cream. And what we try and help parents to understand is, as long as that child knows that when they're there, they can have as much ice cream as they want. At this house, there's no ice cream. And you as the parent, your job is to say, that's great that you get to have all this ice cream at Dad's house. What a wonderful opportunity. Because when you're here, we have a no ice cream house. So I know you're not getting ice cream all the time. It's a special thing that you do with your dad. And that's how we kind of try and frame that idea. It's actually quite okay for parents to have one rule at Dad's house and one rule at Mum's house. It's the job of the parents to not undermine the rule that's in the other house.
Right, yeah.
And just adding to that also, when it is mum and dad, you know, the same thing can play out if the child's in a foster care placement as well. Mum or dad can work with the foster carer to make things quite even in both households, and that both carers, parents, understand what they're looking for together. So there's no difference from a family law court to child protection either. So.
And the only preface I'll say, and Felicity will have something to say about this because of her lived experience, is when a child has a disability and it's actually about their safety, or it's about their anything to do with their disability and their comfort in living with their disability, then that has to be something that is held between two homes. And that might be harder to navigate, and you might need mediation, or you might need a medical professional to come in and sort of talk about that or something along those lines.
And definitely, I think it was Roxanne that talked about that earlier, that routine and that structure, you know, really needs to be there. And sometimes it's not being guided by the parent. Sometimes a therapist might need to guide the parent. And I know in my case with my son and his disability, I need to be guided by therapists and other people that actually know a lot more than what I do. So finding the right people to guide the situation.
Okay, I think we'll have time for a couple more questions. The first one is, how do you motivate parents to facilitate parent-child contact?
I go to, there's a series of questions called the caregiving questions, and I've completely lost who they're, I want to say it's Solomon and someone who did these caregiving questions. And if you have a parent who is really struggling to see the importance of the relationship between a child and a parent, and keeping in mind that different people have a different idea of what that relationship needs to look like. Like, we know that it's actually not about quality of time, it's a quantity of time, sorry, it's about the quality of time. If a parent sees a child once a month for a couple of hours and it's a really good quality time, that means more to that child's ongoing development than seeing that child 50% of the time, and not that parent not being able to manage that for any particular reason, their mental health or things that are going on for them. That would mean that 50% parenting is not the best thing for them as a parent, giving back to their child. And just using some of those caregiving questions to sort of say, you know, what kind of parent do you want to be? What sort of parent do you see the other parent as being to your child? What do you think your child needs from the two of you? And even things like John Gottman, for parents that have maybe got less conflict as well, his book, Raising the Emotionally Intelligent Child, has got a lot of stuff in there about the importance of dad and the importance of relationships with mum and how they are developmentally meant to be different as well, and what they provide to the child long term. So sometimes I give chapters of books to clients to read, and in the hopes that it's going to open up their perspective a little bit.
And I think that can be really empowering as well. On that note, providing parents with information, as I suggested in the talk, just so they can go through it in their own time and digest it and come back and ask questions or whatever they need. I think that's really important.
I guess for me, like exactly what you ladies have said, I think looking, is it safe for mum to do this with dad. You know, I do see, especially in child protection, you know, once PR goes back to mum or dad, you know, in this case, say mum and dad's the DV perpetrator, mum is then to have to facilitate that visit. You know, so mum's then reliving her trauma, having to deal with her perpetrator. You know, so, you know, as a service, how can we help mum? Can we guide her to a service that can deal with this so mum doesn't have to do that stuff as well, or dad, you know? So making sure parents are safe doing this stuff and able to do this stuff.
Terrific. And just as we finish, Emily, I'm wondering if we could just sort of step back a bit, and just in a broader view, be thinking a bit about, from your perspective, like what is it that how is it that we can be supporting children's overall mental health and social and emotional well-being during this period of separation?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important question. I think, that's the focus of our discussion today, is how are we supporting children through this really difficult time. And as I suggested, research shows that it's important that children have access to services targeted at them, support them through separation, for the separation period and beyond that. And ACE research has found that having access trusted third-party practitioners is really important. So people like teachers and counsellors and psychologists and support groups. And as I suggested before, providing information to families that they can digest in their own time. So brochures, even phone numbers, links to websites, things like that on topics like general information about separation and children's wellbeing at that time, tips on how to support and enhance wellbeing through separation, tips on how to manage conflict, things like that. And the CFCA resource on how to speak with separating parents about children's wellbeing is really useful in providing a lot of links and information. If you need more information on that.
Great. Thank you, Emily, and thanks, Felicity. Thanks, Roxanne, for your responses to these very interesting questions, and for your time today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.